The boardroom stretched before Marcus Cole like a courtroom, all polished mahogany and floor-to-ceiling windows, framing Boston Harbor 20 stories below. 12 faces regarded him from leather chairs, faces he'd seen in business magazines, faces that ran one of the most powerful technology companies in New England. 6 months ago, he couldn't have imagined standing here. 6 months ago, he'd been counting quarters in his truck, wondering if he had enough gas money to make it through the week. Joseph Werner sat at the head of the table, silver hair, perfectly coiffed, hands folded over a manila folder thick with accusations. His voice carried the clipped authority of old money and older prejudices. Ms. Ashford, this board has lost confidence in your judgment. Your foundation is nothing more than a public relations stunt designed to distract from ongoing federal investigations. We're voting today on your removal as chief executive officer. Victoria Ashford stood near the window, silhouetted against the morning light. She didn't flinch, didn't shift her weight. Marcus had learned to read her stillness, the way a predator goes motionless before striking. Before you vote, I'd like you to meet someone. Marcus stepped forward, the tailored suit Victoria had insisted he buy, hanging differently than the Goodwill blazer he'd worn to Westbrook Restaurant half a year ago. He carried a leather portfolio, also new, also chosen by Victoria, with the same precision she applied to quarterly earnings reports. The weight of it grounded him. Werner's eyes flicked over Marcus with the same dismissive assessment Richard Beaumont had employed that September night. Pattern recognition came easy when you'd spent 38 years being underestimated. We don't have time for theatrics. This is Marcus Cole. Victoria's voice cut through Werner's protest like a scalpel. 6 months ago, you watched a video of him being humiliated at Westbrook Restaurant. You laughed. Several of you forwarded it with commentary I won't repeat. You called him a charity case. You used our foundation as ammunition in your campaign to remove me. Marcus opened the portfolio. The foreclosure notice sat on top Bank of America letterhead, stark against white paper. He slid it across the table. Cassandra Phillips picked it up, her manicured nails the color of dried blood. 58 days until I lost my home. My daughter asked me where we'd sleep when they came for the house. I had $67.18 in my bank account. 2 jobs, 16-hour days, and it wasn't enough. The room held its breath. Werner's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath expensive cologne and careful shaving. Touching story, Mr. Cole, but hardly relevant to... I also have an MBA from the University of Massachusetts, Boston. 7 years as Director of Community Programs at Boston Housing Authority. In that role, I managed a $2.4 million budget, supervised 11 staff members, and successfully housed 71 families facing displacement. The board members exchanged glances. Marcus watched information recalibrate behind their eyes, the same recalibration he'd seen countless times when people learned construction workers could read Foucault, that black men with work boots might also understand municipal housing codes and grant compliance protocols. In 6 months running the Angela Thompson Foundation, we've helped 32 families avoid foreclosure, 32 single parents who were exactly where I was working themselves to exhaustion and still falling short. Every family we've helped is still stably housed, 94% success rate, better than most transitional housing programs in the state. Marcus pulled out a second folder, this one thick enough to make a sound when it hit the table. 237 pages of documentation cross-referenced and indexed. You wanted to know if this foundation was real or just Ms. Ashford's PR campaign. Let me show you what's real. He froze, holding their attention like a conductor holds an orchestra in the moment before the downbeat. Victoria's slight nod was permission and pride in equal measure. 6 months earlier, Marcus said, and the words became a door opening backward into September. The alarm's electronic shriek pulled Marcus from dreams of Angela. 5:30 a.m. on Thursday, September 18th, same as every weekday for 3 years. He silenced it before the second beep muscle memory, keeping the noise from reaching Zoe's room down the hall. The apartment's thin walls transmitted sound like confessional screens he'd learned to move through morning routines with the silence of someone who'd spent years trying not to wake a sick wife during her few precious hours of sleep. Angela's photograph watched from the nightstand. The hospice photographer had captured her 3 days before the end, when she could still smile without wincing. Marcus touched the frame's corner the way he'd touched her hand those final mornings, a gesture that had become prayer and goodbye and promise all at once. The kitchen counter displayed his failures in neat stacks. Rent notice $800, 2 months overdue, total $1,600. Electric bill, $142, final warning before shutoff. Medical debt payment plan, $89 monthly, 31 months remaining from the 40,000 they'd accumulated during Angela's final year. And beneath them all, the foreclosure notice from Bank of America, bold letters, announcing 58 days remaining before they'd lose the house Angela had chosen because it had good light for Zoe's bedroom. His phone's banking app, loaded with the reluctance of bad news, delivered $67.18. Payday wasn't until Friday. Zoe needed new shoes. Her toes had started curling in the current pair. The pantry held enough for maybe 4 more dinners if he stretched the rice and beans. Marcus made breakfast on autopilot: scrambled eggs, toast, orange juice, measured precisely to stretch the carton through the week. He'd gotten good at mathematics of scarcity, the algebra of not enough. The envelope tucked behind the coffee canister held $238 in 20s and 5s, 3 months of tips and extra shifts and skipped lunches. Tonight, Westbrook Restaurant. Zoe's 80th birthday, the first one since Angela's death, where he'd promised something special instead of just survivable. Zoe emerged at 6:15, already dressed in the blue cotton dress Angela had sewn 4 years ago. The hem had been let out twice the waist, adjusted with careful stitching that spoke of a mother who'd known she was sewing for a future she wouldn't see. The brave pendant hung around Zoe's neck, molded clay letters on a simple cord painted in art class, with the intense concentration 8-year-olds brought to projects they deemed important. Is tonight really happening? Her voice carried hope and disbelief in equal measure, a combination Marcus heard too often from his daughter. Westbrook, 7:30 reservation. I saved exactly enough. He showed her the envelope, let her count the bills. Financial literacy mattered, Angela had insisted. Don't shield her from reality, just from despair. Teach her numbers, teach her planning, teach her that poverty is a circumstance, not an identity. Mommy would be proud. Zoe's fingers traced the envelope's edge. You work so hard. Marcus's voice caught on the words trying to form. He cleared his throat, bought himself 3 seconds. We don't beg, Zoe, we build. Your mom taught me that. Zoe touched the brave necklace, a gesture she'd developed in the year since Angela's death, fingers to clay whenever uncertainty crept in. I made this for tonight, so I'd be brave like Mommy was. The construction site sprawled across 3 city blocks in South Boston's steel frames, rising toward a skyline that promised luxury condos for people who'd never worried about foreclosure notices. Marcus arrived at 7 before most of the crew and spent 30 minutes reviewing the day's structural plans. Reading blueprints soothed something in his brain that the physical labor couldn't reach: the satisfaction of systems making sense, of measurements adding up correctly, of problems having solutions if you just understood the underlying framework. Devontae Freeman found him in the job trailer at 7:40, coffee in hand and curiosity written across his weathered face. 45 years of construction work had left Devontae with shoulders like bridge supports and the kind of wisdom that came from watching patterns repeat across decades. Big night tonight, huh? The fancy place? Marcus folded the blueprints, careful with the corners. Zoe deserves something special. 8 years old, no mother, father, working 3 jobs. She deserves one night that feels normal. 2 jobs, construction and restaurant. The correction came automatic, protective. But Devontae's eyebrow raised, and Marcus realized his mistake. He'd mentioned the Thursday night work once months ago, probably during a lunch break, when exhaustion had loosened his usual privacy. 3, Marcus admitted. I tutor GED students Thursday nights at Trinity Church. $20 an hour cash. Devontae settled onto the trailer's metal steps, sipping coffee with the patience of someone who knew when to wait for a story. You used to run that whole community program there, before Angela, housing assistance, job training, the works. Why'd you quit? The question arrived without judgment, which somehow made it harder to answer. Marcus had practiced deflections, had refined his casual explanations until they sounded true. Needed steady income, program work doesn't pay rent on time. But you were good at it, real good. Helped like 60 families get into stable housing, right? 71. The number emerged before Marcus could stop it, before he could pretend not to remember. But who's counting? Devontae's knowing smile suggested he understood exactly what those 71 represented, not just statistics, but names, faces, children who'd stopped moving between shelters because someone had known which forms to file and which housing authority bureaucrats responded to, persistence versus which ones needed gentle pressure from city councilors who owed favors. The day passed in familiar rhythms: rebar placement, concrete forms, safety checks. Marcus performed with the thoroughness Angela had called his teacher voice. At lunch, he ate the peanut butter sandwich he'd made at home, while the other guys ordered from the food truck. $3.50 saved. It added up, same as debt did, just slower and never fast enough. The restaurant where Marcus worked evening shifts occupied a middle tier between fast food and the places that required reservations. Diane had hired him 3 years ago when desperation probably showed on his face like a rash, and she'd kept him on through every schedule conflict and late arrival caused by Angela's deteriorating condition. The day after the funeral, she'd left a card on his locker. Take the time you need. Job's here when you're ready. He'd been ready in 4 days. Grief was expensive, and rent didn't pause for mourning. Tonight, Thursday, he served tables with the efficiency of someone who'd learned to read customer needs before they articulated them. Table 6 needed water refills before they noticed their glasses emptying. Table 9 wanted separate checks without the awkwardness of asking. Table 12's anniversary deserved acknowledgement but not intrusion. He moved through the dining room like a chess player 3 moves ahead, anticipating needs and solving problems before they escalated into complaints. Diane watched from the host stand, her 50-something face creased with the particular approval of someone witnessing competence. "You're too good at this." She caught him between the kitchen and table 9. "You manage conflict like you've done it professionally. Just customer service." No. Diane's contradiction came firm enough to stop him mid-step. "You read people. You anticipate problems. You de-escalate tension before it develops. I've hired managers with hospitality degrees who can't do what you do naturally." The compliment settled uncomfortably. Marcus had spent 3 years cultivating invisibility in this job, being good enough to keep employed, but not so good anyone looked too closely at the gap between his capabilities and his position. Questions led to conversations. Conversations led to explanations, and he'd grown tired of watching people's faces shift when they learned about the MBA, the community programs, the trajectory interrupted by cancer and caregiving, and the brutal mathematics of American healthcare. His shift ended at 6. Marcus showered in the employee bathroom, changed into the suit he'd brought in a garment bag. The fabric was tired but clean-pressed with care that couldn't quite hide its age. He checked himself in the mirror, presentable enough he hoped for a restaurant that probably judged people by the cost of their shoes. Zoe practiced table manners with her stuffed animals while Marcus double-checked his wallet, $238 in the envelope, $67.18 in his bank account. Enough for dinner with maybe $10 left over for emergencies that always seemed to find him. "You ready, baby?" Zoe stood smoothing the blue dress with small hands that were so much like Angela's it hurt to watch. The brave pendant caught the light. "I've been practicing all week, Daddy. I know exactly how to be fancy." The Uber arrived at $718 that felt like extravagance, until Marcus remembered the parking fees at Westbrook would cost twice that. He settled into the back seat with Zoe, the $238 folded carefully in his jacket's inside pocket. His phone buzzed bank notification, insufficient funds warning for the upcoming mortgage payment. He dismissed it without reading the full message. Tonight was about Zoe. The drowning could wait until tomorrow. Boston lights painted the car windows as they drove through neighborhoods that marked class boundaries as clearly as border checkpoints. From Dorchester's worn stoops to Back Bay's pristine brownstones, 20 minutes of geography spanning decades of economic divergence. Zoe pressed her face against the glass, watching the city transform. "Daddy, what was Mommy's favorite restaurant?" The question arrived innocent, curious. Marcus chose truth over comfort. "She never had one. We couldn't afford fancy restaurants when she was alive." "Then why are we going to one now?" Marcus turned from the window to meet his daughter's eyes. 8 years old and already too perceptive, and already asking the questions that mattered. "Because you deserve to see that you belong anywhere. That being poor doesn't make you less than anyone else. That your character matters more than your bank account." Zoe absorbed this with the seriousness she brought to important lessons. Her small hand found his fingers squeezing. "Miss Diane at your restaurant is nice, but sometimes customers are mean to you. I see how they look at you when I visit." The observation landed with the weight of truth witnessed. Marcus thought about the condescending tones, the impatient snaps for service, the occasional slurs delivered just loud enough to sting, but quietly enough to deny. He'd learned to let it slide off, to smile and refill water glasses and collect tips from people who saw him as scenery. People judge by appearances, baby. Can't control what they think. Can only control how we respond. The Uber pulled up to Westbrook Restaurant at 7:28. Marcus tipped the driver $3, 10% acceptable, but not generous enough to notice. Every dollar counted when you had 67 left until Friday. Westbrook occupied a converted warehouse in the Seaport District, all exposed brick and iron chandeliers and windows overlooking the harbor. The kind of place that appeared in Boston Magazine's annual Best Of lists, where reservations required 6 weeks' notice and entrees started at $45. Marcus had called the day after Zoe's birthday last year, planning ahead with the same careful calculation he applied to stretching grocery budgets across lean weeks. The glass door was heavy enough to signal wealth. Inside, marble floors amplified every footstep, turning entrance into announcement. Crystal chandeliers cast light that flattered carefully moisturized skin and tailored clothing. The other diners looked like they belonged in this light, like marble and crystal were their natural habitat. Marcus wore his only suit purchased 8 years ago for job interviews that had become Angela's funeral, cleaned and pressed, but showing its age in the slight shine on the elbows and the cut that spoke of department store clearance racks. His work boots were the dress shoes. He'd polished them this morning until the scuffs became less obvious. Zoe's handmade dress stood out against the Ralph Lauren and Brooks Brothers surrounding them, like a hand-drawn map in a GPS world. The hostess looked up from her iPad with a professional smile that flickered when her eyes completed their assessment. Celeste, her name tag read. 28, maybe perfectly highlighted hair, the kind of thin that came from Equinox memberships and portion control. Name, Cole, 7:30 reservation. Celeste's fingers moved across the screen with practiced efficiency. Her eyes lifted to Marcus's face, dropped to his boots, rose again to the frayed collar of his shirt, where Angela's careful ironing couldn't quite hide the wear. "One moment, please." She disappeared through a door marked management. Marcus and Zoe stood in the entrance, increasingly aware of the glances from nearby tables. Not hostile looks exactly, just noticing. The way people notice things out of place, a stain on white tablecloth, a spelling error in an important email, a black man in work boots occupying space reserved for different demographics. 8 minutes passed. Marcus checked his phone twice, watched 3 other parties arrive after them, and get seated immediately. Zoe's hand tightened in his small fingers, pressing hard enough to dimple his palm. Richard Beaumont emerged from the management door with the smooth glide of someone accustomed to delivering bad news in pleasant tones. 42 expensive suit smile calibrated for difficult conversations. His handshake was firm and brief, released before genuine contact could occur. "Mr. Cole, I'm Richard Beaumont, General Manager. There seems to be a situation with your reservation." Marcus kept his voice level, his posture straight. 3 years of holding his tongue through worse had trained him well. "I confirmed this morning. Reservation for 7:30. "Yes, well." Richard's hands performed a subtle gesture, palms up, shoulders, slightly raised, the universal signal of powerless sympathy. "Our system shows the table was reassigned to one of our regular patrons. We have a policy of prioritizing our established clientele during peak hours." The words were smooth stones, each one carefully selected to avoid explicit accusation while accomplishing the same goal. Marcus had heard this language before in job interviews and apartment viewings, in parent-teacher conferences, where his daughter's behavioral issues got discussed in terms that never quite mentioned race, but somehow always circled back to it. "I made this reservation 6 weeks ago." "I understand your frustration, Mr. Cole." Richard's tone suggested he understood nothing beyond the need to resolve this situation quickly and quietly. "However, Westbrook maintains certain standards. Our clientele expects a particular atmosphere, a certain level of, what standards does my reservation not meet?" The question came sharper than Marcus intended. He felt Zoe's hand tighten again, felt her small body pressing against his leg. Richard's smile never wavered, professional armor against legitimate questions. "Our dress code requires business formal attire. Leather shoes, pressed suit, appropriate accessories." Marcus looked down at himself, then back at Richard. "I'm wearing a suit and tie." "Perhaps." Richard's pause carried whole paragraphs of subtext. "Our sister location in Dorchester might be more suitable for your needs. More family-oriented pricing, more casual atmosphere." Dorchester, the neighborhood where Marcus lived, where the median income was $30,000 less than Boston's average, where the demographics shifted brown and black, and the restaurant options included more McDonald's than tablecloths. The suggestion landed exactly as Richard intended, a polite banishment to appropriate territory. Other diners were watching now. A woman at table 9 had her phone out, angle suggesting photography or video. 2 men at the bar leaned toward each other, whispering behind bourbon glasses. The restaurant's ambient noise, silverware on china, conversations pitched for intimacy, had dampened attention, redirecting toward the scene at the hostess stand. Marcus felt the weight of performance, the awareness that whatever happened next would be judged and recorded and probably shared on social media within the hour. Viral humiliation or quiet dignity, those were his options, and neither one got him and Zoe to a table. I saved $238 for this dinner. The words emerged steady despite the rage building behind them. 3 months of saving, every extra shift I could get, every tip, for my daughter's birthday. Now you're telling me I can't honor that reservation? Sir, I'm simply trying to offer alternatives that might be more comfortable for everyone involved. Daddy, Zoe's voice cut through the exchange, small and terrified. Everyone's staring. Marcus looked down at his daughter. Tears were pooling in her eyes, 8 years old and already learning the lesson he'd hoped to shield her from for a few more years. The lesson about doors that opened for some people and stayed closed for others, about standards that shifted depending on who was being measured, about the exhausting requirement to prove your humanity every single day. It's okay, Daddy. Zoe's voice cracked on the words, Angela's inflection bleeding through their daughter's attempt at bravery. We can leave. I like mac and cheese at home. We can have mac and cheese. It's better anyway. Time crystallized. The restaurant noise faded to silence. Marcus saw Angela in her hospital bed 3 days before the end, fighting for breath to whisper final instructions. Teach her she matters. Teach her she belongs. Don't let the world make her small. And here was Zoe, 8 years old, trying to comfort him, trying to make his humiliation easier by pretending she preferred poverty to birthday dinners, shouldering adult shame to spare her father's feelings. Marcus's throat closed around words he couldn't form. His hand found Zoe's shoulder, squeezed gently. Okay, baby, let's go. He turned toward the door, maintaining the dignity Angela had insisted mattered, especially when the world tried to strip it away. $238 still in his pocket, birthday dinner canceled, lesson learned about places that didn't want people like them. The sound came from across the restaurant, loud, deliberate, impossible to ignore. A chair scraping against marble, the screech of wood on stone amplified by high ceilings and sudden silence. Every head turned toward the VIP section, near the windows, toward the woman rising from her table like a verdict being pronounced. Victoria Ashford stood with the same commanding presence Marcus had seen in Forbes profiles and business conference videos. 34 years old, 5'9" in heels that added 3 more inches. Natural hair styled in a crown that suggested royalty rather than supplication. Her charcoal suit probably cost more than Marcus's monthly rent. She moved through the restaurant with the certainty of someone who'd never been told she didn't belong anywhere. Richard Beaumont's face shifted through micro-expressions, recognition, concern, calculation. Ms. Ashford, I didn't realize you were dining with us this evening. What's happening here, Richard? Her voice carried authority that made the question sound like a deposition. Every diner in Westbrook was watching, now phones out, some pretending to text while their cameras captured everything. Just a reservation issue, nothing to concern. I see a confirmed reservation being denied. I see a well-dressed father and daughter. What exactly is the issue? Marcus met Victoria's eyes for the first time. Something passed between them, not recognition exactly, but acknowledgement. She saw him, not through him, not past him, not with the assessing dismissal Celeste and Richard had employed. Saw him as a person experiencing injustice rather than an inconvenience to be managed. Our dress code policy requires, I'm wearing a suit. Victoria's interruption sliced through Richard's explanation. This gentleman is wearing a boot and tie. His daughter is beautifully dressed. Explain the policy violation. Richard's mouth opened, closed, opened again. The calculations happening behind his eyes were visible. Fire a wealthy black woman in front of witnesses, or maintain the discriminatory practice that had probably been Westbrook's unofficial policy for years. Either choice had consequences. Neither was good. Perhaps I was hasty in my assessment. I'd like to invite Mr. Cole and his daughter to join me for dinner. Victoria addressed Marcus directly, not asking permission from Richard, not acknowledging his authority to grant or deny access. My table has room. Would you join me? Pride warred with pragmatism in Marcus's chest. Accepting felt like charity, like proving Richard right about not belonging. But Zoe's fingers were still gripping his, and her birthday was still today, and Angela's voice echoed in his memory. Don't let pride starve your daughter. Save your dignity, but don't weaponize it against yourself. That's very kind, we accept. Victoria's slight smile suggested satisfaction. She turned to Richard, and her voice dropped to a tone Marcus recognized from managing difficult situations, calm, clear, leaving no room for negotiation. Have their reservation honored at my table. And Richard, will discuss your interpretation of dress code policies tomorrow. I'm considering purchasing this establishment. Tonight's events will factor into that decision. The walk to Victoria's table felt like moving through a gauntlet. Every eye in the restaurant tracked their progress. Phones captured the moment. Tomorrow's social media would feature this scene from a dozen angles with commentary ranging from celebration to outrage depending on which audience was performing their reactions. Victoria's table overlooked the harbor, positioned where water views and city lights combined into the kind of backdrop that made dinner feel like achievement rather than necessity. She gestured to the chairs across from her with the easy hospitality of someone accustomed to commanding space. Please sit. Marcus helped Zoe into her chair the way Angela had taught him. Napkin unfolded, placed in lap. Posture straight but not rigid. Hands visible but not intrusive. All the small performances that signaled education and manners to people watching for reasons to dismiss. Waiters materialized with menus and water glasses, their attentiveness a stark contrast to the 8-minute wait at the hostess stand. Fear of Victoria drove the service Marcus recognized. Whatever power she held, it was enough to transform him from unwelcome to catered to in the span of a 30-foot walk. What's your name, sweetheart? Victoria's question aimed at Zoe, gentle without being condescending. She leaned forward slightly, giving his daughter her full attention in a way adults rarely bothered with children. Zoe Marie Cole, today's my 8th birthday. 8 is a powerful age. My mother taught me something important when I was 8. Zoe's curiosity overcame her shyness. What? That dignity isn't something other people give you, it's something you claim for yourself. Marcus watched Victoria's face as she spoke, searching for calculation behind the kindness. Rich people didn't interrupt expensive dinners to defend strangers without reason. But her eyes held something that looked like genuine recognition, like she was seeing past the current moment into memories that still carried weight. You said something at the hostess stand. Victoria's attention shifted between Zoe and Marcus. You told your father, it's okay, Daddy. We can leave. You were protecting him. Zoe nodded, suddenly fascinated by her water glass. Children shouldn't have to protect their parents. That's backward. No, they shouldn't. Silence settled over the table, weighted with things unsaid. Marcus felt exposure crawling across his skin. This woman knew something, had researched something, wanted something. The question was what and why and how much it would cost him. My mother said similar words to me once, a long time ago in a situation not unlike this one. Victoria's voice had softened, vulnerability bleeding through the executive armor, but she didn't elaborate, didn't turn the moment into full confession. Just left the parallel hanging between them, connection offered without demanding reciprocation. The waiter appeared, breaking the moment before it became too heavy. Victoria ordered for the table with efficiency, appetizers, entrees, wine for adults, sparkling cider for Zoe. She didn't ask, prices didn't hesitate over choices. Money was a solved problem in her world, a fact that hung between them like weather. Conversation flowed more easily as food arrived. Victoria asked about Zoe's school, her interests, her favorite subjects. She listened to answers with attention that seemed genuine, asking follow-up questions that suggested real curiosity rather than polite performance. Zoe responded with increasing enthusiasm, 8-year-old reserve melting under adult interest. Marcus watched, cataloging details. Victoria's left hand bore no rings. Her nails were manicured but short, practical. She ordered food with familiarity that suggested regular dining at places like this, but she also praised the bread basket with genuine appreciation rather than jaded entitlement. Contradictions stacked up: Ice Queen reputation versus warm engagement with his daughter, ruthless business tactics versus this intervention on behalf of strangers. Mr. Cole, what do you do, Key? The question arrived casual, but Marcus heard assessment beneath it. This was performance she probably already knew. Rich people didn't accidentally stumble into helping strangers. Construction and restaurant service. And before that, the follow-up confirmed his suspicion. She wasn't asking from curiosity. She was establishing what he'd admit. Community development work, housing programs. Why did you stop? Her tone suggested genuine interest, but the question was too precise to be random. Life changed, priorities shifted. I see. But Victoria's acknowledgement held understanding that bordered on too knowing. And if priorities shifted again, if you had resources to return to that work. Suspicion crystallized into certainty. This wasn't chance encounter. This was recruitment or manipulation or some combination Marcus couldn't yet parse. Why are you asking? Because I'm looking for someone who understands struggle from experience rather than theory. The admission was direct enough to be either honest or sophisticated strategy. Marcus couldn't tell which. Victoria stood, pulled a business card from her jacket pocket. Heavyweight paper, embossed lettering. Mr. Cole, I'd like to meet with you. Tomorrow, if possible. 1 p.m. at my office. I have a proposition. What kind of proposition? The kind that might honor both our mothers' memories. The words stopped Marcus's breath. Our mothers, she knew about Angela, had researched him enough to reference his dead wife as leverage or connection or both. How do you know about? I do research when I'm interested in someone's potential. Tomorrow, Reynolds Technologies downtown. Will you come? Marcus met her eyes, saw certainty there that made him deeply uneasy and oddly hopeful in equal measure. I'll think about it. Victoria placed cash on the table enough to cover the entire meal plus generous tip. No credit card, no signature, nothing requiring waiting. Money a solved problem. Think quickly. Some opportunities have short windows. She bent slightly to address Zoe. Happy birthday, Zoe. Don't let anyone make you forget you're remarkable. Then she was gone, moving through the restaurant with the same command she'd shown arriving. Marcus and Zoe sat in silence. The food was probably excellent. The harbor view was certainly beautiful. But Marcus's mind was racing through calculations trying to solve for variables he couldn't identify. Daddy, Zoe's voice pulled him back. How did she know about Mommy? I don't know, baby. The Uber home cost $17. Zoe fell asleep against his shoulder, exhausted by emotion and rich food. Marcus carried her inside, tucked her into bed, still wearing the blue dress, brave pendant, catching hallway light as he pulled her blanket up. Alone in the kitchen, Marcus stared at Victoria's business card. Reynolds Technologies. The name triggered vague recognition, tech company billionaire CEO, something about federal investigations he'd half heard on news he rarely had time to watch. He pulled out his phone, typed her name. The first page of results told him enough. Victoria Ashford's CEO net worth estimated at $4.8 billion. Currently facing antitrust investigation. Board pressure. Shareholder lawsuits. The Ice Queen, they called her. And somehow this woman had been at Westbrook tonight. Had intervened. Had offered him a meeting about a proposition she claimed would honor Angela's memory. Nothing about this made sense. Billionaires didn't rescue construction workers from restaurant humiliation without agendas. The question was what agenda and whether Marcus could afford to refuse finding out when he had 58 days until foreclosure. His phone buzzed, unknown number. Mr. Cole, this is Victoria Ashford. I hope tonight ended better than it began. Tomorrow, 1 p.m. Friday, if you're willing to listen. No obligations, just conversation. Marcus stared at the message. She'd gotten his number somehow. More research, more preparation, more evidence this had been planned. He should be angry, should feel manipulated. Instead, he just felt tired and curious and desperate enough to consider that maybe being used by a billionaire was better than losing his house. I'll be there, he typed back. The reply came instantly. Good. And Marcus, I've been researching you for 3 weeks. You deserve to know that before we meet. Tomorrow, I'll explain why. Marcus read the message 3 times. The honesty was either refreshing or terrifying. She'd been watching him planning something, saw him as useful rather than accidental, and she was telling him up front. He looked at Angela's photo on the refrigerator, their wedding day, both younger and convinced that love and hard work were enough to build good lives. I don't know what to do, Marcus whispered to the memory. She wants something. I need something. And I can't tell if that's enough to make this safe. Angela's voice echoed from their last coherent conversation. Promise me you'll use your gifts, not just to survive, to help others. Don't let my death be the end of your purpose. Marcus had broken that promise when he'd left Housing Authority, when he'd traded mission for hourly wages. He'd justified it as necessary as responsible parenting. And maybe it had been, but it had also been retreat. Now Victoria Ashford was offering him a rope, maybe lifeline, maybe noose. Maybe he wouldn't know until he was already committed. 58 days until foreclosure. $67 in his account. A daughter who deserved better than watching her father drown. Tomorrow, Friday, he'd walk into Victoria's office and learn what the Ice Queen wanted from a construction worker with a foreclosure notice. Dignity wasn't given, Victoria had said. It was claimed. But claiming required leverage, and leverage required options, and options required resources. Marcus didn't have. Tomorrow, maybe he'd learn what it cost to borrow someone else's. Morning arrived without Marcus having achieved anything resembling rest. He moved through the apartment's familiar layout mechanically, Zoe's breakfast-packed lunch with the precision of someone who'd learned that forgotten homework or missing snacks meant phone calls from school he couldn't always answer during work hours. The construction site could spare him for an afternoon, and Diane had already agreed to cover his dinner shift when he'd called with vague explanations about a job interview. The kitchen counter's stack of bills hadn't changed overnight. Rent notice still showed $1,600 past due. Foreclosure warning still declared 58 days remaining. His phone's banking app still displayed $67.18. But something had shifted in Marcus's calculus. Victoria's offer existed now as actual possibility rather than abstract hope. The question was whether possibility became trap or salvation. Devante noticed immediately when Marcus arrived at the site wearing slacks instead of work jeans. The foreman's experienced eyes tracked the anomaly, connected it to yesterday's viral video, probably calculated that his best structural supervisor was about to become someone else's employee. Got that meeting today with the billionaire. Marcus nodded while reviewing blueprints. He wouldn't actually be supervising his mind already downtown in glass towers, where decisions got made that didn't involve concrete or rebar. Yeah, Reynolds Technologies, 1 p.m. Man, you know you're viral, right? Westbrook video's got 500,000 views. People calling her a hero for standing up to that racist manager. Calling you brave for handling it with dignity. Marcus pulled out his phone, searched his own name for the first time in years. The results made his stomach drop. Someone had identified him from the footage, connected him to a LinkedIn profile he'd forgotten existed, found his work history in Angela's obituary and Zoe's name buried in search results. The internet had decided he was a symbol worth dissecting. Can't unring that bell. Marcus pocketed the phone. Guess we see if it helps or hurts. My money's on helps. You're good people, Marcus. World knowing that ain't bad. The sentiment was kind and probably wrong. Visibility meant vulnerability, meant strangers feeling entitled to opinions about his life, his choices, his worthiness of the help Victoria was offering. But Devante meant well, so Marcus just spent the morning pretending to review safety protocols while actually rehearsing conversations that would never go how he imagined. At noon, he changed in the site trailer, same slacks and button-down from last night, the blazer less obviously cheap in natural light. The bus downtown cost $250, watching Boston transform from working neighborhoods to financial district through scratched windows that framed the city's economic geography like uncomfortable art. Reynolds Technologies occupied prime real estate, where harbor views meant six-figure salaries and corner offices represented hierarchies Marcus had spent his adult life navigating from below. The lobby was all marble minimalism and security guards whose uniforms probably cost more than his entire outfit. Marcus Cole, here to see Victoria Ashford. The guard checked his tablet with the neutral professionalism of someone trained to make everyone feel simultaneously welcomed and monitored. 17th floor, Ms. Ashford's assistant will meet you. The elevator was fast enough to make his ears pop. When doors opened, a woman waited, fitted dress, natural hair, in Locke's expression, managing professional warmth without crossing into actual friendliness. Mr. Cole, I'm Helena. Ms. Ashford is finishing a call. She led him through open workspace where dozens of employees pretended not to stare at the viral video man walking past their desks. Whispers were audible even over ambient phone calls and keyboard clicks. Marcus kept his eyes forward, refusing to perform shame for their entertainment. Victoria's office occupied the corner with floor-to-ceiling windows, offering views that probably cost more per square foot than entire apartments in Marcus's neighborhood. She stood at her desk, phone pressed to ear, free hand gesturing as she talked. Seeing Marcus, she held up one finger. Wait, and concluded her conversation with surgical efficiency. Tell them no. If they can't meet our timeline, we'll find partners who can. I don't negotiate with people who waste my time. She ended the call, set the phone down with finality, turned her full attention to Marcus. In her office, in her element, Victoria seemed different than at Westbrook, more contained, harder-edged executive armor, fully deployed. Thank you for coming. Marcus stayed near the door, maintaining physical distance as proxy for emotional boundaries he'd need to establish. How long have you been researching me? The directness caught her mid-gesture toward the conference table. She paused, recalibrated, apparently decided honesty was better strategy than deflection. 3 weeks, since I saw your name in Boston Housing Authority's alumni directory. So last night wasn't coincidence. The timing was coincidence. My presence wasn't. I wanted to see how you handled adversity under pressure. Victoria gestured toward the table. Please sit. I'll explain everything. Marcus remained standing. I'm not interested in being someone's social experiment. That's not what this is. Victoria's voice sharpened slightly, command bleeding through. Then she caught herself, softened deliberately. You're right to be suspicious. Let me be completely transparent about what I'm offering and why. She pulled a folder from her desk, slid it across the conference table. Marcus moved closer but didn't open the folder to find detailed documentation, organizational charts, budget projections, legal structures for nonprofit incorporation. I'm creating a foundation. Emergency assistance for single-parent families facing foreclosure. You would design and run it. Marcus scanned the documents. The numbers were real: $65,000 salary prorated over 6 months, health insurance office budget, staffing allowance. Either Victoria was committed enough to create elaborate fakes, or this was legitimate. Why me? There are professional, nonprofit executives with more recent experience who've never been $67 away from losing their homes, who've never had to choose between their daughter's medicine and electricity, who've never heard their child try to comfort them by saying, "It's okay, Daddy." The repetition of Zoe's words landed like accusation and empathy combined. Victoria had been paying attention, filing details away, understanding exactly which emotional levers would move him. She opened a second folder, this one thicker. Marcus recognized his own face in the documents: employment records, tax returns, bankruptcy filing from Angela's final month's credit report showing medical debt that would follow him for decades. I know everything, Marcus. Your MBA from UMass Boston, 7 years at Boston Housing Authority as Director of Community Programs, 71 families successfully placed in stable housing, 3 community partnerships you built from nothing. Then Angela got sick. Marcus's hands tightened on the folder's edge. The invasion felt clinical, surgical, like being dissected for parts someone else wanted to use. You left Housing Authority because you needed flexible hours for caregiving. After she died, you needed immediate income. Construction paid weekly, restaurant paid nightly. You abandoned your calling because survival required it. The judgment implicit in abandoned made Marcus's jaw clench. He'd made the only choices available, had prioritized keeping Zoe fed and housed over abstract professional fulfillment. Victoria's summary reduced impossible decisions to character weakness. My calling was keeping my daughter alive. And you succeeded, heroically. Victoria's acknowledgement came without condescension. Now I'm offering you a chance to return to your purpose with financial security. She pulled out a third document, the actual job offer terms, spelled out in legal language that looked legitimate enough to have involved actual attorneys. 6-month pilot program. You design the structure, select families, manage operations. Salary $65,000 prorated. Health insurance for you and Zoe. 2 staff members you hire. If successful, after 6 months, we transition to permanent 501c3 status with you as executive director. Marcus did the math automatically. $65,000 prorated over 6 months meant $32,500. More than he'd earn in a year working construction and restaurant shifts combined. Enough to catch up on the mortgage, clear some medical debt, breathe for the first time in 3 years. What's the catch? Transparency. You report to a board, not just me. Monthly financial audits. Media coverage because yes, this helps my public image, and I won't pretend otherwise. But the work must be real. 32 families in 6 months. Documented outcomes. Actual impact. Why 32 specifically? Because it's achievable without overpromising. 32 families means careful vetting, adequate support, sustainable results. It's a number we can defend when people question our effectiveness. The specificity suggested genuine planning rather than thrown-together PR response. Marcus studied Victoria's face, looking for calculation behind the offer. Found it, obviously, but also found something else, conviction that felt separate from self-interest, like she'd convinced herself this served both her needs and some larger purpose. I have conditions. Victoria's slight smile suggested she'd expected exactly this. 1, I select the families. No political considerations, no board interference in who gets helped. 2, my daughter's schedule is non-negotiable. School events, soccer games, normal dinners together. If this job requires sacrificing time with Zoe, I'm not interested. 3, if this ever becomes about optics over impact, I walk immediately. No notice, no explanation. Agreed on all counts. Victoria's response came fast enough to suggest she'd anticipated exactly these demands. Do you accept? The question hung between them like a contract requiring signature in blood. Marcus thought about the foreclosure notice, about Zoe's 2 small shoes, about the 71 families he'd helped before survival had required retreat. Thought about Angela's last coherent request that he use his gifts for others, not just for getting by. I need to talk to Zoe first. She lost her mother. Stability matters more than any opportunity. Victoria nodded, apparently respecting the priority, even if it delayed her timeline. I understand. Take the weekend if you need it. But I'll need an answer soon. The foundation needs to launch while the Westbrook story is still fresh in people's minds. Marcus moved toward the door, then stopped. One more question, demanded asking. Why are you really doing this? Not the version that sounds good in press releases. The truth. Victoria was quiet long enough that Marcus thought she might not answer. When she spoke, her voice had shed some of its executive polish. Because my mother died believing she didn't deserve to eat in nice restaurants. Because I've spent 15 years building an empire and forgotten what it was for. Because watching you and Zoe reminded me of who I used to be before money made me into someone my mother wouldn't recognize. She walked to her desk, pulled out a photograph in a simple frame. A black woman in a yellow dress, smile fighting against exhaustion, holding 7-year-old Victoria's hand. Maria Ashford, she cleaned this building at night, died of a heart attack at work when I was 12. I promised her I'd never become the kind of person who looked through people like they didn't exist. Somewhere along the way, I broke that promise. This foundation is me trying to keep it again. The vulnerability felt genuine, which made it either true or sophisticated manipulation. Marcus had learned that with wealthy people, those categories weren't mutually exclusive. I'll give you my answer this evening. After I talked to Zoe, Mrs. Patterson's apartment smelled like the cinnamon air freshener she bought in bulk from dollar stores, masking the building's underlying scent of old pipes and deferred maintenance. Zoe was doing homework at the kitchen table when Marcus arrived, backpack organized with the precision of a child who'd learned early that chaos meant things getting lost that couldn't be replaced. How was the meeting? The question came while Zoe gathered her materials, adult curiosity wrapped in 8-year-old voice. She'd learned too young to track her father's job prospects to understand that interviews mattered and opportunities were rare, and disappointment was more common than success. Good. Confusing. We'll talk about it at dinner. At home, Marcus made spaghetti while Zoe finished her math problems at the kitchen table. The routine was comfortable, familiar, a bubble of normal they'd maintained through everything else that had fractured and failed. When Zoe completed her homework, Marcus plated their food and sat across from her. Remember Ms. Victoria from last night? Zoe nodded, twirling pasta around her fork with concentration that suggested she'd been waiting for this conversation. She offered me a job, running a foundation that helps families like ours, people who are about to lose their houses, who need support getting stable again. That's what you used to do before Mommy got sick. The observation came matter of fact, Zoe's child memory compressing years into before Mommy got sick and after. She didn't remember Marcus in his housing authority office, didn't have pictures of him negotiating with landlords and filing grant applications. But she'd absorbed the story somehow, constructed understanding from overheard conversations and careful explanations. Yeah, it's what I was good at, what I cared about. Then you should do it. Zoe's logic was 8-year-old, simple, uncluttered by adult complications. If it's what you're good at and it helps people, why wouldn't you? Marcus thought about all the reasons: Victoria's hidden agendas, the exposure of being viral video famous, the risk of this foundation collapsing and leaving him unemployed with resume gaps harder to explain than construction work. Thought about how accepting help from billionaires felt like selling something he couldn't quite name, but knew he'd miss once it was gone. Sometimes good opportunities come with complicated strings attached. I need to make sure those strings won't hurt you. Zoe set down her fork, her expression shifting into serious child mode that made her look eerily like Angela. Will you still pick me up from school? Yes, that's non-negotiable. Will we still have dinner together every night? Every single night, that's in my conditions. Will we have to move again? Marcus heard the fear beneath the question. They'd moved 3 times since Angela's death, each apartment smaller and cheaper than the last, each move representing another failure to keep promises about stability. The foreclosure would mean moving again, probably to a worse neighborhood with worse schools and windows that didn't lock properly. No, the job pays enough that we can keep this apartment, catch up on bills, stay exactly where we are. Zoe absorbed this information, visibly relaxing. 8 years old and already calculating housing security like an adult, already understanding that roofs over heads weren't guaranteed just because they were necessary. Then you should take it. Ms. Victoria seems nice. And if you're helping families, that's what Mommy wanted, right? The simplicity of her reasoning cut through Marcus's elaborate calculations. Angela had wanted him to use his skills helping others. This job did that. The rest, Victoria's motives, public exposure, billionaire strings, mattered less than the core question of whether the work itself was worth doing. You're right. Okay, I'll take it. Zoe grinned gap-toothed and delighted like she'd solved an adult problem through superior logic. Maybe she had. Maybe Marcus had been overthinking, letting suspicion and pride complicate what should have been straightforward decision-making. After Zoe went to bed, Marcus texted Victoria, "I'll take the role. When do we start?" Her response arrived within minutes, like she'd been waiting. "Excellent. Can you start in 2 weeks, October 2nd? That gives us time for legal setup and office preparation." Marcus thought about his construction job, about Diane at the restaurant, about burning bridges versus keeping options open. 2 weeks was professional notice, gave him time to transition without leaving people stranded. 2 weeks works. Send the paperwork. Will do. And Marcus, thank you. This matters to me more than you probably believe. Marcus didn't respond to that. Whether it mattered to Victoria was her business. Whether it helped actual families was his. As long as those interests aligned, the partnership could work. He gave notice, Friday morning, Devante accepting it with the philosophical resignation of someone who'd watched good workers move on before. "You'll be missed, but you're doing the right thing. Construction will always be here if you need it. Purpose work, that's harder to find." Diane took the news with similar grace, though she extracted a promise that he'd come back for the occasional shift if the foundation ever failed. Insurance against uncertainty. The kind of safety net people who'd survived poverty understood was necessary even when optimism suggested otherwise. Joseph Werner's office occupied the same floor as Victoria's, but faced inland rather than harbor view, a subtle hierarchy Victoria had enforced when restructuring executive spaces 3 years ago. The deliberate slight still rankled, just one item on Werner's extensive list of grievances. Cassandra Phillips sat across from his desk, leather chair creaking as she shifted weight. 48, inherited wealth from real estate and strategic marriages, board member, primarily because her investment firm controlled enough Reynolds shares to demand representation. She'd aligned with Werner's faction early, recognizing that Victoria's aggressive growth strategy exposed them all to regulatory risk. The video has 240,000 views now. Werner pulled up footage on his monitor, watching Marcus and Zoe being humiliated for the dozenth time. Comments are calling Victoria a hero. Globe ran a profile this morning, painting her as some kind of social justice warrior. Cassandra studied the screen, fingers drumming against her armrest. Why should I care about her PR victories? Because she's using this incident to launch a foundation, making herself look like a saint while federal investigators are examining our books, creating sympathetic narrative that board members will hesitate to disrupt. The logic was sound enough to make Cassandra lean forward, attention sharpening. What kind of foundation? Emergency assistance for single-parent families facing foreclosure. Marcus Cole running it, construction worker. She's positioning as inspirational story of redemption through her generosity. Werner's contempt made the words acidic. Pure theater designed to rehabilitate her Ice Queen image while we're under federal scrutiny. So expose it as theater. Show the board she's wasting company resources on pet projects. Werner shook his head, appreciating Cassandra's directness while recognizing its limitations. We need more than accusations. We need evidence that the foundation is illegitimate, that Cole is unqualified or hiding problems, that Victoria's judgment is compromised enough to justify removal. Cassandra's expression shifted into calculation, Werner recognized from years of corporate maneuvering. You want me to investigate Cole? I want you to find anything that makes him look like a charity case she's exploiting for publicity. Financial disasters beyond the obvious, foreclosure, inappropriate relationships, anything that undermines the narrative she's building. Werner slid an envelope across his desk. 10,000 in hundreds cash that wouldn't appear in any ledger or leave electronic trails. Cassandra picked it up, weighed it without counting. What if there's nothing to find? Man might be exactly what he appears, struggling father trying to rebuild. Then we create doubt. Audit irregularities that raise questions. Family selection criteria that look arbitrary. Conflicts of interest between Cole and Victoria. Werner's voice dropped to the register he used for instructions that couldn't be repeated. The foundation is new enough that accusations alone will force board scrutiny. Cassandra pocketed the envelope, her hesitation suggesting some limit to her ruthlessness that Werner would need to navigate around. 3 weeks until the emergency board meeting. That's tight timeline for building a case. We don't need a perfect case. We need enough doubt to justify board action questioning Victoria's priorities. In corporate governance, uncertainty is often sufficient for removal. After Cassandra left, Werner sat alone reviewing the Westbrook video again. The way Victoria had stood up, commanded the restaurant, challenged Richard Beaumont. With absolute certainty, it was the same presence she brought to board meetings, the same refusal to accept limitations that had built Reynolds Technologies into a $4.8 billion company. And that was precisely why she needed to go. Vision was valuable until it became liability. Conviction was admirable until it threatened shareholder returns. Victoria had served her purpose building the company. Now she was becoming the obstacle to its stable, profitable future. Werner began drafting messages to other board members, planting seeds, raising questions, building coalition. 3 weeks until the emergency meeting. 3 weeks to destroy the foundation before it could establish legitimacy. 3 weeks to remove Victoria Ashford and install leadership that understood the difference between running a company and running a crusade. Sometimes destruction was just preparation for better construction. Werner had learned that truth across 40 years of corporate governance. Victoria would learn it too once the board delivered its verdict. The following Friday evening, Marcus stood in the grocery store with Zoe's basket containing more than they'd bought in a single trip for 3 years. The foreclosure was still pending, wouldn't be resolved until his first paycheck cleared. But knowing that paycheck was coming $32,500 over 6 months enough to catch up and stay current changed how he navigated aisles that had previously felt like displays of things other people could afford. Zoe paused in the produce section, small hand reaching towards strawberries in their plastic containers. Fresh berries, not the frozen kind they usually bought when they bought any at all. She looked up at Marcus with the practiced restraint of a child who'd learned early not to ask for things that cost too much. "Can we get strawberries, Daddy, real ones?" Marcus felt his throat tighten. Such a small request, so carefully phrased. Real ones like the fresh fruit was somehow more authentic than the budget alternatives they'd been living on. Like strawberries in September were a luxury worth noting, rather than just food that belonged in a basket. "Yeah, baby, we can get strawberries." He reached for the container, placed it carefully among the other items that represented their changing circumstances. Zoe's smile bloomed gap-toothed and delighted, and Marcus had to blink away tears that had no business appearing in grocery store produce sections. This was what stability felt like. Not wealth, not excess, just the ability to say yes to fresh strawberries without calculating what other necessity would have to be sacrificed to balance the budget. The foundation job hadn't even started yet, but already it was changing what felt possible. Walking to the checkout, Marcus thought about Werner's plotting about investigations and board meetings and corporate warfare he was now caught in. Thought about Victoria's hidden agendas and the ways he was being used as symbol and weapon. Thought about all the complications that came with accepting help from people whose motives were never simple. But he also thought about Zoe's strawberries, about families he'd soon be helping avoid foreclosure, about work that felt like purpose instead of just survival. Maybe this was real. Maybe despite all the political maneuvering and billionaire strings, this was their second chance at building lives that included small luxuries like fresh fruit and stable housing, and the breathing room to think about futures instead of just getting through today. The mathematics of hope were harder to calculate than the mathematics of poverty. But standing in the checkout line with strawberries in his basket and his daughter's hand in his, Marcus decided to trust the equation even knowing he didn't control all the variables. Werner could plot, Victoria could maneuver, the board could judge. Marcus would do the work, help the families build something worth protecting. And whatever battles came next, at least he'd face them from position of having said yes to strawberries. Some victories were that small. Some hope was that fragile. But both were real enough to matter. The foundation office occupied 1,200 square feet on the 3rd floor of a building Victoria owned in Jamaica Plain. Not prestigious enough to intimidate the families they'd served, not decrepit enough to suggest the operation was temporary. Marcus arrived 2 hours before the scheduled staff meeting, wanting time alone with the space before other people's energy filled it. 3 desks arranged in an L shape, filing cabinets that locked, computer system with passwords only he and Terrence would know. The wall behind his desk remained empty. He'd fill it later with photos of families, help documentation that the work was real and continuing. For now, the blankness felt appropriate, a canvas waiting for proof that his return to this calling mattered beyond Victoria's PR needs. Helena arrived at 8, carrying boxes of office supplies and the careful professionalism she'd maintained since the Reynolds Technologies meeting. Marcus had hired her despite or because of recognizing her as Westbrook's former hostess Celeste. She'd applied under her real name, had been direct about her previous employment during the interview. "I was Celeste the night you came to Westbrook. I followed Richard's instructions without questioning whether they were right. I'd like a chance to do better work." The honesty had earned her the position more than her administrative credentials, though those were solid enough. People who acknowledged mistakes without making excuses about them were rare. Marcus valued the quality enough to overlook the association with his humiliation. Terrence Wallace arrived at 8:30, 45 years old, with accounting certifications and nonprofit experience at three organizations Marcus had vetted personally. He moved with the quiet competence of someone who understood that financial integrity wasn't about following rules, but about building trust that could withstand scrutiny. First rule of foundation work: every dollar has a receipt. Every receipt has a purpose. Every purpose tastes to mission. We do this right, or we don't do it at all. Terrence's intensity matched Marcus's own. They spent 90 minutes reviewing the budget line by line, establishing procedures that would survive audits from hostile reviewers. Because Werner was coming, Marcus felt that certainty in his bones, and when he came, the books needed to be cleaner than legal requirements demanded. At 10, the first interview began. Shanice Bennett had filled out the application 3 days ago, her handwriting shaky enough to suggest either poor education or hands that trembled from stress. Probably both. She arrived early, which Marcus noted as significant. People drowning in crisis often lost track of time, let appointments slide because surviving the day took all their energy. That Shanice showed up 15 minutes ahead suggested someone still fighting, still hoping structure could save her. 34 years old, three children visible in the waiting area through the glass partition. The oldest looked maybe 10, the youngest still in a stroller, despite being past stroller age. Budget constraint. Marcus recognized strollers were cheaper than paying attention to a wandering toddler while managing two other kids and trying to avoid homelessness. Ms. Bennett, thank you for coming. Tell me about your situation. Shanice's story arrived in fragments that Marcus assembled into coherent narrative through years of practice. Husband Terrell had died 9 months ago, heart attack at 36 while working double shifts as a warehouse supervisor. The company claimed he'd violated safety protocols by lifting boxes beyond approved weight limits. Workers' compensation denied. Life insurance lapsed during medical bills from their youngest child's asthma treatments. Now Shanice worked 2 jobs, morning shift at a nursing home, evening cleaning offices, and still brought home $2,300 monthly against $3,400 in basic expenses. The eviction notice gave her 30 days. She'd already lost her car to repossession, was borrowing her sister's beater to get to work, would lose both jobs without transportation. The mathematics of poverty spiraled like that, each loss amplifying the next, each crisis making the following one more likely. What would stability look like for you? Shanice's answer came with the specificity of someone who'd calculated this from every angle. 3 months rent, $3,900 total. Buys me time to find one better paying job instead of 2 barely paying ones. I've got an interview next week for insurance claims processor, $42,000 starting salary, but they won't hire someone about to be homeless. Need an address that's stable. Marcus recognized the trap. Better job required housing stability. Housing stability required income from better job. Breaking the cycle demanded intervention at exactly the right moment with exactly the right resources. Approved. 3 months rent assistance, $3,900. We'll also connect you with job training, resources, and legal aid for the workers' compensation appeal. Shanice's face did something Marcus had seen 100 times in his housing authority days. Disbelief, followed by relief, followed by tears that came from somewhere deeper than gratitude. He let her cry, understanding that sometimes people needed permission to stop being strong for 30 seconds. Why are you doing this? The question always came, usually phrased this way. People who'd been told they didn't deserve help, who'd been denied and dismissed and lectured about bootstraps and personal responsibility, couldn't quite process strangers offering assistance without requiring humiliation in exchange. Because someone's doing it for me, and because you're exactly who this foundation exists to help. Parents working hard, following rules, and still drowning. That's not a moral failing. It's a systemic problem, and we're building systemic solutions. After Shanice left, Marcus sat alone in his office, processing the feeling he'd forgotten existed. Purpose. Not survival purpose, not getting through the day purpose, but the kind of meaning that made work feel like contribution instead of just necessity. He'd missed this, the satisfaction of matching resources to needs, of watching intervention prevent catastrophe, of being useful in ways that required his specific combination of skills and experience. Helena knocked softly on the doorframe. Next interview in 10. Robert Hayes, single father, 3 kids, construction worker, facing eviction. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. 6 months ago, that could have been his own file. Now he sat on the other side of the desk, holding power to help or turn away to be the person he'd needed when no one had appeared. By day's end, Marcus had interviewed 14 families. Approved 7 after careful vetting, checking income documentation, verifying eviction notices, confirming that intervention would actually help rather than just delay inevitable collapse. 5, he'd referred to other programs better suited to their needs. 2, he'd declined because the numbers didn't work. Assistance wouldn't solve underlying problems, would just drain resources that could help families with better stability. Prospects. Terrence reviewed each approval running calculations that confirmed Marcus's instincts. 7 families meant $26,800 in initial assistance. Against a 6-month budget of $200,000, they were pacing toward helping 32 families total. Exactly the deliverable Marcus had promised Victoria. Good first day. Terrence closed his laptop with satisfaction. You've still got the instincts. Probably better now than before. How do you figure? You've lived it recently. Most nonprofit directors are 3 degrees separated from the crisis they're managing. You were almost homeless 6 months ago. Makes you sharper about what actually helps versus what just feels good to give. The observation landed with uncomfortable accuracy. Marcus had approved Robert Hayes' application partly because he recognized himself in the man's file, understood exactly how construction worked, and single parenting and unexpected setbacks combined into foreclosure spirals. Empathy-informed judgment made him better at distinguishing between people who needed temporary help and people who needed different interventions entirely. The phone call came during Marcus's second week, pulling him from budget review into immediate crisis. Zoe's school principal voiced tight with the particular discomfort of having to deliver news that reflected badly on her institution. Mr. Cole, there's been an incident. Zoe's involved. You should come in. Marcus left Helena in charge, drove to the elementary school with his stomach churning through possibilities. Zoe didn't fight, didn't act out. She was 8 years old and had learned early that drawing attention in predominantly white spaces meant inviting scrutiny that rarely ended well. The principal's office felt designed to intimidate oversized desk, uncomfortable chairs, positioned lower than hers walls, covered with achievement certificates that probably meant nothing but established hierarchy. Principal Anderson sat behind her fortress expressions, suggesting this conversation was an obligation she resented rather than a problem she cared about solving. Zoe occupied a plastic chair outside the office, eyes red, but no longer actively crying. Her brave pendant was clutched in one fist, clay letters leaving imprints in her palm from how hard she'd been gripping. What happened? Anderson's account arrived in administrative language designed to obscure rather than clarify. An altercation between students, disruption of the learning environment, inappropriate outbursts during lunch period. Marcus listened for what wasn't being said, for the gaps where actual explanations should exist. Who was Zoe fighting with? Not fighting, yelling, at Ivy Phillips in front of other students. Marcus felt something click into place. Ivy Phillips, Cassandra Phillips's daughter. Board member who'd taken Werner's envelope, who'd been tasked with finding dirt on Marcus that could undermine the foundation. What was Ivy doing before Zoe yelled? Anderson's hesitation confirmed Marcus's suspicion that the precipitating incident was being conveniently elided from official narrative. Ivy was showing classmates a video, the incident at Westbrook Restaurant, made some comments that upset Zoe. The clinical language couldn't hide what had actually happened. A 10-year-old had shown viral footage of Marcus being humiliated, had used it as ammunition to hurt Zoe, had weaponized her father's public degradation for social dominance. And Anderson was framing Zoe's response, yelling at her bully, as the problem requiring correction. What consequences is Ivy facing? Anderson's expression shifted into the careful neutrality that always meant unequal application of rules was about to be justified. The Phillips family has been very generous to our school. They fund our arts program, contribute to facilities improvements. Ivy's behavior was addressed privately with her parents. Translation: wealth purchased immunity from accountability. Ivy could torment Zoe with impunity because her mother's donations mattered more than basic fairness. Thank you for your time. Marcus gestured for Zoe to follow. Anderson's surprise was visible. She'd expected argument, justification, defensive parenting. Instead, Marcus was removing Zoe from an environment that had proven its priorities had nothing to do with protecting his daughter. In the car, Zoe stared out the window while tears tracked down her face. Marcus let silence hold space for her processing, didn't rush to comfort or explain or make the hurt smaller than it was. She said you only have a job because Miss Victoria felt sorry for you, that you're a charity case and everyone knows it. The words emerged in a rush, like poison Zoe needed to expel before it spread further. Marcus pulled into a parking lot, turned off the engine, shifted to face his daughter directly. Look at me, Zoe. She turned slowly, eyes meeting his with the wariness of someone expecting disappointment. Do you know why I have this job? Because Miss Victoria gave it to you. No, because I have a master's degree, 7 years of experience running community programs, skills that made me exactly what the foundation needed. Ms. Victoria recognized that. She didn't give me the job. She offered it. I earned it by being qualified. Zoe absorbed this, some tension releasing from her small shoulders. But kids at school don't believe that. They think you're just lucky, that we're poor and Ms. Victoria rescued us. People will always doubt you when you succeed, especially when you're black and they can't imagine you earned what you have. Your job isn't convincing them. Your job is proving them wrong through excellence. The words were ones Angela had taught him, the same ones Marcus's mother had taught him, the endless, exhausting requirement that black achievement always had to be twice as good to be considered half as credible. He hated passing this burden to Zoe, hated that her childhood included lessons about navigating racism that white kids never needed to learn. Ivy's mom is on the Reynolds board, Mrs. Phillips. Marcus's alarm must have shown on his face because Zoe's expression shifted into concern. Is that bad? It's complicated, but it's not your problem to solve. That's adult business. But driving home, Marcus understood the coordination Werner had engineered. Cassandra's daughter tormenting Zoe wasn't accident or coincidence. It was strategy, create pressure on Marcus's family, make the foundation feel like burden instead of opportunity, force him into mistakes or resignation that would serve Werner's larger campaign. The realization crystallized into cold certainty. This wasn't just corporate politics. This was attack that included his 8-year-old daughter as acceptable collateral damage. And that changed Marcus's calculations about how far he'd go to protect what he was building. Victoria answered on the second ring background noise, suggesting she was in meetings that his call had interrupted. Marcus, is everything okay? Cassandra Phillips's daughter bullied Zoe at school today. About Westbrook, about the foundation, about me being a charity case. Principal basically excused it because the Phillips family donates money. Silence on Victoria's end, the kind that preceded explosions Marcus had learned to recognize. I'll handle it. No, we handle it. That's what partnerships mean. Victoria's pause suggested recalibration, adjusting to Marcus, asserting equal authority instead of accepting her protection. What are you proposing? I'm proposing we document everything. Every instance of coordination between Werner's faction and pressure on my family. Build evidence that this isn't about foundation governance. It's about using me and Zoe as weapons against you. That's smart, also potentially dangerous. Werner doesn't like being outmaneuvered. Marcus thought about Zoe's tears, about 8-year-old children being deployed in corporate warfare, about the casual cruelty of people who saw others as instruments rather than humans. I don't care what Werner likes. He crossed a line involving my daughter. Now it's personal. Good. Victoria's voice carried satisfaction Marcus recognized from board meetings where she'd destroyed opponents who'd underestimated her. Personal means motivated. Come to my office tonight. We'll build a strategy. At Reynolds Technologies, after hours, the building felt different, quieter, emptier. The daytime performance replaced with nighttime reality of people working late because ambition demanded it. Victoria's office lights were the only ones burning on the 17th floor. She'd changed from executive armor into jeans and MIT sweatshirt transformation that made her seem younger and more approachable. Papers covered her conference table foundation, budgets, board communications, email chains, Marcus recognized as internal Reynolds discussions. I've been going through Werner's patterns. He's methodical, always establishes paper trail that makes his actions look like fiduciary responsibility instead of personal vendetta. Marcus scanned the documents, seeing the architecture of Werner's campaign. Questions about foundation budgets framed as prudent oversight. Concerns about Marcus's qualifications positioned as protecting shareholders and from Victoria's impulsive charity. Suggestions that the foundation distracted from managing the antitrust investigation presented as legitimate governance. This is sophisticated. Werner's been playing corporate politics for 40 years. He knows how to destroy people while looking reasonable. Victoria pulled up additional files on her laptop. But he made a mistake involving your daughter. That's not business. That's personal attack that crosses ethical lines even boards won't tolerate. Marcus studied the timeline Victoria had constructed. Werner's conversation with Cassandra happened 3 days after Marcus accepted the job. The investigation into Marcus's background began immediately. Ivy's bullying started the week Marcus's first family approvals got local news coverage. They're not even hiding the coordination very well, because they don't think we're looking. Werner assumes I'm focused on the federal investigation, that you're too busy with foundation work to notice board politics. Victoria's smile was sharp enough to cut. Underestimating opponents is how smart people lose. She opened another document, Westbrook's online reviews spanning 6 years. Marcus recognized the pattern immediately. Multiple complaints from families of colors about selective seating mongered wait times despite reservations as dress code enforcement that seemed to correlate with skin tone rather than actual attire. This wasn't just about us. This is systemic. I know, I've been documenting it since the night we met. At least a dozen families with similar experiences, all dismissed as individual misunderstandings, but together they show pattern and practice. Marcus felt purpose sharpening into something that transcended his personal situation. This was bigger than Werner's campaign against Victoria, bigger than One Foundation's survival. This was about proving that discrimination wasn't aberration, but system, that what had happened to him and Zoe was happening to countless families who didn't have billionaire allies. What do we do with this? We present it at the board meeting. Show them Werner isn't protecting the company, he's protecting his investment in Westbrook's parent company. Conflict of interest that makes his governance concerns look like self-serving manipulation. The strategy was sound, but Marcus saw the gap. That requires admitting you knew about the discrimination pattern before buying Westbrook. Makes you look like you planned the whole thing. I did plan some of it. Victoria's honesty was refreshing after weeks of careful political maneuvering. Not the encounter that timing was genuine coincidence, but I'd been researching you for 3 weeks. I knew you'd applied to Westbrook. I went there intentionally to see what would happen. Marcus absorbed the confession, testing his reaction. Manipulation, definitely. But manipulation in service of exposing actual injustice, using her resources to create opportunity for intervention. The moral calculus was complicated enough that Marcus decided to focus on outcomes rather than intentions. Board won't care about your motives if the results are real. 32 families helped is 32 families helped regardless of why you started the foundation. That's what I'm counting on. But we need those results to be undeniable, which means the next 3 weeks are critical. We need more families approved, more documentation of impact, more proof this is a legitimate program rather than PR stunt. Marcus checked his mental math. 7 families approved in 2 weeks meant they needed another 25 in the next 10 weeks to hit the 32 target. Aggressive, but achievable if they maintain current pace. We'll hit the numbers. Question is whether Werner lets us get there. Victoria's expression suggested she'd already considered this problem. He'll try to disrupt, audit the foundation, question approvals, maybe leak information to media that makes us look incompetent or corrupt. We need to be cleaner than clean. Every dollar accounted for, every decision documented, every family approval defensible. Terrence is already on that. Man's paranoid about financial integrity. Good. Paranoia is appropriate when people are actually trying to destroy you. They worked until midnight building defense against attacks they could anticipate and contingencies for ones they couldn't. By the time Marcus left, he understood the battlefield clearly. Werner controlled board votes through relationships and favors accumulated across decades. Victoria controlled the company through competence and results. The foundation was contested territory where both sides were fighting proxy war for larger stakes. And Marcus was the weapon both wanted to claim, the sympathetic figure whose legitimacy or illegitimacy would determine whether Victoria's transformation narrative succeeded or failed. The realization should have felt dehumanizing. Instead, it clarified his position. Being a weapon meant having power even if that power came from being wielded by others. The question was whether he could maintain enough agency to ensure the wielding served purposes beyond Victoria's corporate survival. The foundation's 3rd week brought momentum that felt sustainable rather than lucky. 14 families approved, all carefully vetted, all showing strong stability prospects. Local media coverage was positive human interest stories about families avoiding homelessness, about a program that valued dignity alongside assistance. Marcus gave interviews where he emphasized systematic support over charity, replicable models over one-time interventions. The attention brought additional donations beyond Victoria's funding. Small amounts, mostly $50 here, $100 there, but enough to suggest community investment in the work. Terrence set up a separate account for these contributions, maintained meticulous records that showed none of the money touched Reynolds Technologies' budgets. Perception matters as much as reality. Terrence's accounting philosophy extended beyond numbers into optics. When Werner comes with his audit, we show him books so clean they could be used in ethics textbooks. Victoria visited the office for the first time on Friday afternoon, arriving without announcement or entourage. She moved through the space observing how Marcus interacted with staff, how families were greeted, how the physical environment balanced professionalism with accessibility. Her approval was visible in small nods and questions that demonstrated genuine interest rather than performative engagement. After Helena left for the weekend, Victoria lingered sitting in the chair where families usually sat during intake interviews. You're good at this. Better than I expected. Marcus looked up from the case file he'd been reviewing. Why does that surprise you? I did this work for 7 years. I know, but there's a difference between having done something years ago and still being good at it. Skills atrophy, instincts get rusty. Yours haven't. If anything, you're sharper now than you probably were before Angela got sick. The observation was perceptive enough that Marcus wondered how much Victoria had researched about his housing authority tenure beyond basic employment dates. Having been on the other side helps. I know what it feels like to face eviction, to do math, where the numbers never quite add up, to need help while hating that you need it. Makes me better at understanding what families actually need versus what sounds good in grant applications. Victoria studied him with the intensity she probably brought to evaluating quarterly reports, analytical, but not cold, searching for patterns that revealed underlying truth. The board meeting is in 3 weeks. Werner will present his case for removing me. Part of that case will be attacking the foundation as evidence of my compromised judgment. You ready for that? Are you asking if I'm ready to defend our work or if I'm ready to watch you lose your company? Both. Marcus closed the case file, gave Victoria his full attention. The work is defensible. 14 families in 3 weeks, all vetted, all showing positive outcomes. Budgets, clean procedures, documented impact measurable. Werner can question your motives all he wants. He can't credibly argue the foundation isn't doing what it claims to do. And the second part, if I lose, the vulnerability in the question surprised Marcus more than the question itself. Victoria was preparing for failure contingency planning for corporate exile and asking whether Marcus would continue the work without her backing. Foundation is legally separate from Reynolds Technologies. If you're removed, the funding continues through the structure we established. I keep doing the work. You keep funding it from personal wealth if necessary. Werner gets nothing except your CEO position. Victoria's relief was visible, shoulders releasing tension Marcus hadn't realized she'd been carrying. Thank you. I needed to hear that you're committed to the mission beyond me being your patron. This stopped being about you the moment Shanice Bennett cried in my office. The moment Robert Hayes got to keep his apartment. The moment 14 families had their immediate crisis resolved. That's real, Victoria. Whatever happens with your corporate politics, that part stays real. The moment stretched between them, charged with something Marcus couldn't quite name. Professional respect was part of it, certainly. Shared purpose, mutual protection against common enemies. But something else was emerging too, attraction, maybe, or recognition of complementary strengths, or just the intimacy that developed when people fought battles together. Victoria stood breaking the tension before it could develop into something that would complicate their already complicated alliance. I should go. You probably have Zoe waiting. Weekly dinner night. We've been doing it since Angela died. Fridays are sacred. That's good. Stability matters, especially for kids who've lost a parent. Marcus walked Victoria to the elevator, professional boundaries reestablishing themselves with each step away from the moment they'd almost acknowledged what was building between them. Werner's going to escalate. Victoria's prediction came as the elevator arrived. He's running out of time before the board meeting. Expect something aggressive in the next week. Let him come, we're ready. After Victoria left, Marcus sat alone in the office that was already starting to feel like his space rather than borrowed territory. The walls needed filling, photos of families, documentation of impact, proof that this work mattered beyond corporate maneuvering. But the foundation itself was solid, built on skills he'd almost forgotten he possessed: serving purpose. He'd thought he'd lost when survival became his only goal. His phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. Ms. Victoria coming to dinner. Marcus smiled at his daughter's transparent matchmaking. The answer was no. Tonight needed to be just the two of them, maintaining the Friday tradition that predated Victoria's entrance into their lives. But Zoe's question suggested his 8-year-old had noticed what Marcus was trying to ignore, that the professional relationship was developing edges that extended beyond foundation governance and corporate politics. He texted back, just us tonight, but maybe we invite her next week. The response came immediately. Yes, she should meet us on Fridays. That way she knows we're normal. Marcus laughed at the logic, as if weekly dinners could prove normalcy, as if inviting a billionaire into their modest apartment wouldn't highlight every gap between their worlds. But Zoe's instinct was sound. If something was developing between Marcus and Victoria, it needed to survive outside conference rooms and crisis management, needed to exist in spaces where they were just people sharing meals, rather than allies fighting common enemies. Next Friday, then, he'd extend the invitation, see whether Victoria's interest in his life extended to actually experiencing it rather than just funding solutions to its problems. For now, he had a daughter to pick up and a weekend to decompress before Monday brought whatever escalation Werner was planning. The official letter arrived Tuesday morning, delivered by courier to ensure Marcus couldn't claim he hadn't received it. Helena brought it to his desk with the wariness of someone handling explosives. Certified mail from an attorney. Looks important. Marcus opened the envelope, already knowing what he'd find. Notice of audit authorized by Reynolds Technologies Board of Directors investigating potential irregularities in Angela Thompson Foundation, financial management. The language was careful, legally precise, designed to sound like prudent oversight rather than hostile investigation. He called Victoria immediately. They're auditing us. Official board authorization, external accounting firm, full review of all transactions since inception. Victoria's pause suggested she was processing implications rather than being surprised by the development. Werner's timeline, 3 weeks until board meeting, needs ammunition to justify removing me. Audit creates cloud of suspicion even if it finds nothing wrong. Our books are clean. I know, but clean doesn't matter if Werner's auditor is looking for problems rather than accuracy. They'll question judgment calls, suggest alternatives that look more prudent in hindsight, build narrative of mismanagement even from defensible decisions. Marcus felt rage building, the particular fury that came from being attacked, despite following every rule from playing fair in games where opponents cheated openly. So what's our move? We cooperate completely, give them everything they ask for, answer every question, demonstrate transparency that makes obstruction accusations impossible, and we accelerate. Get more families approved, more documentation of impact, more proof that whatever they find in the audit is noise compared to actual results. Terrence took the audit notice with professional calm that suggested he'd been expecting exactly this development. Good thing we've been documenting like the apocalypse was coming. Give me 2 days to prepare everything they'll request. They want receipts? They'll get receipts so detailed they'll know which grocery store we bought office supplies from and what time of day we shopped. The audit team arrived Thursday, 3 accountants from a firm Marcus recognized as one that primarily served corporations defending against regulatory investigations. They were professional, thorough, and clearly operating from a checklist designed to find problems rather than verify accuracy. Lead auditor Raymond Blackstone was 60-something, experienced enough to make his skepticism look like diligence rather than bias. He reviewed expense reports with the intensity of someone searching for discrepancies, questioned family approval criteria, like he was cross-examining witnesses, suggested alternative procedures that would have made the foundation less effective but looked more conservative on paper. This approval, Shanice Bennett, $3,900 for 3 months' rent. How did you verify she'd actually use the money for housing rather than other expenses? Marcus kept his voice level, professional, refusing to perform defensiveness that would look like guilt. We paid the landlord directly. Check made out to property management company, not to Ms. Bennett. Same procedure for all housing assistance. Money never touches the family's hands, eliminates any question about appropriate use. Blackstone made notes that suggested he was looking for ways to reframe prudent procedures as somehow suspicious. The pattern continued through 2 days of review, every smart decision questioned, every documented process treated as potential cover for misconduct, every success story dismissed as anecdotal rather than meaningful. By Friday afternoon, Marcus was exhausted from performing patience he didn't feel. Blackstone packed his materials with the neutral expression of someone who'd gathered ammunition and was preparing to deploy it strategically. We'll have preliminary findings in a week. Full report 2 weeks after that. Board will review before their scheduled meeting. After the audit team left, Marcus sat alone in his office, calculating damage. They'd find nothing legally wrong. Terrence's documentation was immaculate. But Blackstone would write a report that made defensible judgment, calls look questionable, that suggested inexperience and possible mismanagement, that gave Werner exactly the ammunition he needed to argue Victoria's foundation was frivolous distraction from serious business. Victoria called it six-voice tight with controlled fury. Blackstone's preliminary notes already reached Werner. He's circulating them to board members with commentary about my compromised priorities. What do the notes say? That your approval process prioritizes speed over caution. That family selection criteria are subjective rather than objective. That the foundation lacks proper oversight mechanisms despite technically following nonprofit regulations. Marcus recognized the strategy. Make things that were actually strengths look like weaknesses by framing them differently. Quick approvals became reckless haste. Flexible criteria became arbitrary favoritism. Streamlined governance became insufficient accountability. It's all spin. Of course it is, but spin works when the audience wants to believe it. Half the board is already predisposed to remove me. They'll read Blackstone's report looking for justification, not truth. Marcus heard defeat creeping into Victoria's voice, the sound of someone who'd fought hard and smart, and was starting to recognize that sometimes that wasn't enough. We're not done yet. We've still got a week before the board meeting. Time to build our case and present it. What case? Werner controls the narrative. Blackstone's report supports his position. I'm fighting with evidence that requires people to care about nuance and mission over simple metrics. Then we make them care. We bring families to the board meeting. Let Shanice Bennett tell them herself what the foundation meant. Let them see that the work is real and the impact matters beyond whatever spin Blackstone puts on procedures. Victoria was quiet, considering the strategy. That's risky. Exposing families to board politics, putting them in position where their crises become entertainment for wealthy people, judging whether helping them was worth Victoria Ashford's corporate position. I'll only bring families who volunteer, who understand what's at stake, and choose to participate. Agency matters, Victoria. Don't make decisions for people by assuming they're too fragile to handle complexity. The rebuke landed softly but clearly. Victoria's instinct to protect sometimes crossed into patronizing, forgetting that poor people navigated complexity every day and were fully capable of making informed choices about their own participation in battles that affected their lives. You're right, I apologize. Ask families if they're willing. If they volunteer, we bring them. Marcus spent Friday evening calling the families they'd helped, explaining the situation with the honesty they deserved. The board meeting mattered. Werner was trying to shut down the foundation by removing Victoria. Their testimony could make a difference, but only if they were comfortable being visible in corporate warfare that had nothing to do with them personally. Shanice Bennett agreed immediately. That foundation saved my family's life. Least I can do is show up and tell the truth. You let me know when and where. Robert Hayes was equally direct. Man helped me keep my kids housed. I'll testify anywhere, anytime. By midnight, Marcus had commitments from 6 families willing to appear. 6 voices that could cut through Werner's manufactured concern about governance procedures. 6 stories that proved the foundation was real, the work mattered, the results justified whatever imperfect processes Blackstone wanted to criticize. He texted Victoria the update. 6 families ready to testify. We present Tuesday at the board meeting. Make sure they have a platform to speak. Her response came 30 minutes later. You've given me hope again. Whatever happens Tuesday, thank you for that. Marcus stared at the message, reading vulnerability that Victoria rarely showed. She was genuinely uncertain about the outcome, genuinely afraid of losing the company she'd built, genuinely dependent on Marcus's strategy to have any chance of survival. The weight of that trust was heavier than any responsibility he'd carried since Angela's final days. But it also clarified his purpose. This wasn't just about helping families anymore, wasn't just about his professional redemption or financial stability. It was about proving that building things that mattered was worth protecting, even when protection required fighting people with more power and resources and institutional advantages. Werner had made this personal by involving Zoe. Now Marcus would make it existential by forcing the board to choose between comfortable corruption and uncomfortable justice. Tuesday would decide everything. Either the foundation survived and expanded, or Werner won, and Marcus returned to construction work and counting quarters, and trying to explain to Zoe why good work sometimes failed despite being good. But for now, he had a weekend with his daughter. Tomorrow was their standing Friday dinner, and he'd invited Victoria to join them. Small, normal moments before the battle that would determine whether those moments could continue. One day at a time, one family at a time, one choice at a time. Angela had lived by that philosophy through her illness. Marcus would honor it through this fight. The work was worth protecting. The families were worth fighting for. And if Werner wanted to destroy what they'd built, he'd have to do it publicly, in front of people whose lives proved his dismissal of mission over metrics was morally bankrupt, even if it was legally defensible. Marcus closed his laptop, turned off his office lights, locked the door behind him. Monday would bring final preparation. Tuesday would bring war. Tonight he'd rest and trust that the work they'd done was strong enough to withstand whatever attacks were coming.